2,000 years ago, a name you're probably familiar with, a man named Pontius Pilate, who was a Roman governor, the one who sentenced Jesus to death by crucifixion, asked a famous question: what is truth? Well, 2,000 years ago, I think if we're honest, we can all say we still have no idea. Due to the rise of AI, the popularity of unashamedly partisan news outlets, the incredible viral speed of mistruths to spread, the influence of siloed social media accounts, and the power of, I'll just say it, serpent-tongued politicians, perhaps on both sides, whose native language appears to be lying. It feels to me like, in some ways, we are in an unprecedented time. A time when truth is what I say it is, and oh wow, it just happens to line up with what I already think and believe and how I vote. And to me, the most worrisome thing about this twisted normalization of untruths is that I think this younger generation is seeing it, and they're beginning to model it as well. This pastor, social justice leader, activist, and professor at Yale, named Reverend Dr. William Barber II, said, "The most revolutionary thing you can do in a time of lies is tell the truth." So that is exactly what we are going to try and do this morning. Tell the truth. But the one we're going to have a come to Jesus with is ourselves. So for the past few weeks, we've been talking about what it means to become. We talked about, almost comparing God to the potter and us to the clay, and that we are being shaped and reshaped and molded into something more reflective of who Jesus is, in order that we can become who God created us to be. Critical to that transformation is acknowledging truth. What is truth? And primarily, what is the truth about myself? Am I being honest with myself? And since it is clear, abundantly clear, that I have absolutely zero control over what someone else thinks or believes or does, or the lies they tell, but I can commit myself to the truth and being honest with myself, today I'd like to invite us to take a long, hard look at ourselves and our own relationship with the truth. Am I being honest with the way I relate to truth and who I am? And it is a conversation that can only happen when we are willing to travel to the least likely of places to meet the least likely of people. The least likely of places like Jacob's Well, and to the least likely of people like the Samaritan woman. So in our reading this morning, John tells us, Jesus came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. So in 2010, 15 years ago, I was the planting pastor of a new community in Phoenix, in the Phoenix area, called Jacob's Well. And we named it that because I just love this story in the way that Jesus went into a different place to meet someone who was considered the other, and the way that she was transformed by this encounter with Jesus. It was, a really special church. It was no Violet Crown, but and it ended up becoming like this little liberal oasis in the midst of this desert of conservative megachurches. Well, looking back now, however, I think we had missed a central truth of what Jacob's Well actually is about and what's supposed to happen there. I think in many ways we had encountered Jesus at the well, But in reality, we wanted nothing to do with the Samaritan woman. Jacob's well, we weren't supposed to just be transformed by Jesus. We were supposed to be transformed by the Samaritan woman as well. So our passage today begins with Jesus traveling to a region called Galilee, a Jewish region. But to get there, he had to travel through Samaria. Well, it turns out it was not a mere shortcut. It was him making a statement. So Samaria wasn't a separate political state. Believe it or not, there are still a group of folks called Samaritans. You should Google it. It's really interesting background and history. So it wasn't a different political state in the Roman Empire. Still, deep differences for a lot of reasons because of their history in politics, race, and religion had created what appeared to be an uncrossable chasm between Jews and Samaritans. We still see these kind of divides in our world today. But basically, in modern terms, Samaria is that side of town. Samaritans are those people. You know, those co-workers, neighbors. You would never enter their house. And you can think of reasons why. However, it is less, of course, about a place. It's the kind of people that those places represent. Samaritan woman in this passage is those people. And then as now, those people don't have first names, right? They're just objects. They are people we group together, known as the first name them. And we can say all sorts of things about them. We don't actually have to know them, right? Well, apparently Jesus, as always, did not get the memo because he spent a lot of his life and ministry among those people, even though his religion often prohibited such interactions. In fact, so what do we read that Jesus does in the presence of a woman of a different race, religion, and gender? He just goes on to have the longest recorded conversation in all four Gospels with a single person. He does not have the longest conversation we read about in the Gospels with some of his own religion, one of his own people. No, the longest recorded conversation we have between Jesus and another human being is with someone who is of a different religion. He hangs out with those people. So in that spirit, and because it generally seems like a good rule of thumb that you can't go wrong when you try to do what Jesus did, this morning I want us to consider a few truths that I think each of us need to embrace, as challenging as they are to embrace, to meet not only Jesus at the well, but learn what it means to meet the Samaritan woman at the well also, in order that we would finally get honest with ourselves about how we relate to truth. So my prayer is that as we get to know her, we will become more fully who Jesus intended us to be. So the first truth of the well is that assumptions are the enemy of truth. So Jesus told the Samaritan woman, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." All right. Any Google search or popular commentary about this passage will confidently declare, and you've probably heard sermons and made assumptions yourself about what we read, that this woman, any woman who has had 5 husbands and is living with some guy now that's not her husband, what is she? She's a sinner. She's a sinner. Collective sigh. Of course, that is what we would assume about her. Of course, we would jump to that conclusion, we religious people who seem to be obsessed with judging women's life circumstances and their sexuality. But we have got it all wrong about this woman. So in the first century, women had some legal rights, but oftentimes not when it came to marriage. Their fathers would arrange the marriage to benefit the family, and these women, girls really, who would be married off as young as 12 years old, needless to say, had little say about who they were being promised to, and it was oftentimes to a much older man. All that to say, these women could easily outlive several husbands, right? Not to mention, according to Jewish law, only husbands could initiate divorce, and they could do so without any sort of explanation or justification. I dismiss you. So widowed or divorced women were then expected generally to remarry, and despite the lies that our modern day purity culture peddles about what biblical marriage is, and whenever someone says, I'm interested in biblical marriage, you should respond, polygamy. Believe it or not, according to some historical research I've done, cohabitation was not uncommon in the first century, and at times was perfectly acceptable, an alternative to marriages. So no, despite what we've been told in all of our assumptions, the Samaritan woman was not a sinner. If she were, would Jesus not have called her to repent? Because every other time we come across someone that is named a sinner, Jesus invites them to repent. But he doesn't say that to this woman here. He shares this information, and then she ends up saying, you are a prophet. So it seems to me that the only sinners present at the well that day are those who self-righteously think they already know everything they need to know about this woman, based on nothing more than our assumptions. Fact is, we don't know her, and claiming that we do has become not only a stumbling block to truth, but to any possibility of relationship. And we all do this. So I saw a news clip, a video, and it was two men. One was wearing a red hat, and one man was yelling at him, the man in the red hat. And I thought, good for you. You deserve to be yelled at. The camera pans around, and the man's hat says, made you look, Black Lives Matter. Suddenly, I'm thinking, how dare you yell at him? Come on, Jay. The hypocrisy, even I've got to identify that. I made an assumption about someone in a red hat. I don't need to know anything about them. Or do I? Assumptions are our lazy and sinful way of condemning and dismissing the Samaritans in our own life. She's a sinner, right? Is she? But Jesus did not condemn the Samaritan in his life, and as a result, he made not only possibility for conversation, but relationship. It seems to me if we really want to experience Jesus and be honest, actually honest, we have to stop making assumptions about someone to say we know them and everything that is about them. But assumptions are an enemy to discovering truth. And when we make an assumption, we are not being honest at all. And it is getting in the way of who God created us to be. Challenging, but true. Second truth of the well, name the differences, but also proclaim the hope. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? The Samaritan woman said, you are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? And then I love that John throws in, Jews do not associate with Samaritans. So I love that right off the bat, the Samaritan woman just calls a spade a spade. You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan, you're a man, I'm a woman. This conversation is going nowhere. However, what I love even more is that what she says right after that is that she expresses their common need. Why are Jesus and the Samaritan both at the well? Because they both have thirst. They are there for at least somewhat of a common reason. And they're both interested in worshiping in the right way. And they basically get into an argument about who's worshiping in the right way. So I love that they both name the differences. Can you imagine even just sitting down with someone and say, hey, you believe this, I believe that. Let's just name it. This is not like let's just all get along. No, we're different. We're going to just name everything straight up. But then, what if right after that we named, but do we both have a same need or desire for the world? Would that make conversation very different? And then the great thing is, I hate to psychoanalyze Jesus and this woman, but this is the way I'm reading this, is that then it doesn't become some kumbaya moment. Jesus then just busts out, names truth, says, I am the one who can be this constant source of living water for you. And in fact, salvation does come from my people. I'm sorry, you're not worshiping right. We are worshiping right. However, and this to me is huge, after naming truth, he immediately says, yet a time is coming when none of that will matter. It will be bigger than that. True worshipers won't be defined by where they worship, on your mountain or on mine, but those who worship in spirit, and this is very interesting, and in truth. So he names truth, but then he also says a shared future that will transcend all differences in religion, race, and gender. So it does take courage to name truth, right? Don't back down on your truth. Don't water down what you believe is to be true. We're not being honest if we both say, well, we don't actually believe this. No, let's just name it. The Samaritan woman says, my ancestors worship here, you worship there, we disagree. But then she expresses a hope saying, there is one bigger than us that understands truth. I know Messiah is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. There's a higher authority here in this conversation. Jesus says, I am the one speaking to you. I am he. So they both declare truth. They also both declare hope. And not just for themselves, but for everyone. A time is coming when all will worship in this way. So I think all relationships at the well begin with honesty, just brutal honesty, but also end with hope. What is our shared hope here? So what would that truth-telling look like? And I can't tell from the vibe of the room if people are starting to check out, like, yeah, I know that neighbor. We're not having that conversation. So I'll just name it. I didn't know if people are just getting tired or like if you're like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But let's be honest. I mean, the purpose of this series is to be honest, right? So, you know, in the newsletter, I sent that thing out. Stephen Colbert's like, hey, we all say we're Christians. Let's love and serve the poor. But yeah, I really have no interest in doing that. Then let's just name it. We just don't want to. So if you leave here this morning just saying, listen, yeah, I just don't want to, then that's at least being honest. But, you know, the purpose, my role here, and I'm speaking to myself, is do we actually want to do that? To me, is that what Jesus wants us to do? Maybe our answer is no. But if we think intellectually, yeah, he does, fine, that Jesus, then we have to respond, right? So what does that truth-telling, but also hope proclaiming, look like in our own life? And then third, final truth at the well. There's probably others, but pastors just like to work in threes. And this one, it's like, you know, have you ever seen that shirt, taters, not haters? Well, I'm just going to go with this. Haters going to hate, but grace going to win. Just then the disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. So let me ask you this. Is the status quo in our nation right now sustainable? The proliferation of misinformation, the normalization of lying, it's crazy. The categories of us and them, my truth, your truth, I'm right. And not only are you wrong, you are condemned. I mean, it's pretty telling that the gospel writer John, and remember, he's one of the disciples he's talking about, says, the ones who are obstacles to truth and conversation and relationship here are the disciples. Here come the disciples. Why are you talking to a woman? Why are you talking to a Samaritan? John was one of those disciples that he's talking about in that situation. So the followers of Jesus are the ones who are the obstacles here. So we can just name it. There will always be these haters and agitators and trolls. I read an article recently that said, no matter what, don't feed the trolls. So when people comment on our Facebook page or on our welcome video or anything, I just hide the comment. There will always be those who simply do not want peace or unity or honesty or truth-telling, and they don't want anything to do with the Samaritan. They're conservatives and they're progressives. They're Christians and they're non-Christians. And no matter how hard you and I may try to build bridges, again, not kumbaya, but forge some sort of relationship and uplift truth, some people will just suck your soul right out and just burn your energy, right? I would say it's okay to, as Jesus says, shake the dust off your feet when you leave that house or town. I think it's probably good advice in a hyper-divided world. He does, however, say, seek the person of peace. So do you know people in your own life that have different beliefs and opinions, but that you would consider perhaps a person of peace? Not someone who is just like hell-bent on changing you, or anyone who is just flooding the internet with misinformation. I just don't think that's going to be your person of peace to build bridges with. I don't know if they want to be at the well. However, when we do meet that person of peace, I think, what if we went into the conversation saying, I'm not here to change you and convince you of my truth. I am here that God may transform me. Not to change my mind into your truth, but to transform me into a more honest person. I think when two people can potentially come together in this way, Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well, I think that's probably what you call grace. And the ripple effects of grace are amazing. We read, many of the Samaritans from that town believed in Jesus because of the woman's testimony. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days, couch-surfed. And because of his words, many more became believers. So I like to think that not only was the Samaritan woman and her entire village transformed by that encounter, but perhaps Jesus, as a Jewish man, as he stayed in the village of these people of a different race, religion, culture, perhaps then that was one of the sparks that helped him to say, the gospel is going out way bigger than just my people. So if we believe that God desires for us to live in greater peace, and that truth is probably just grace in disguise, then must we commit ourselves to a different way? Assumptions kill. At a minimum, maybe we can emerge from here saying, I don't know that person fully. They're a complicated human being. Naming the differences, I think, does liberate. Proclaiming a shared hope, that at least builds a bridge. And grace through encounters with others at this living well, perhaps is our only hope. So our hope is that in some way, Jesus said, the truth will set you free. What does that mean? Perhaps finally being honest with ourselves changes things. So that's my hope and prayer, and I'll start with myself. Amen.